My name is Maya. I'm 35 years old, living and working in Seattle. But the story I'm about to share with you doesn't begin with my job or any success. It begins with a moment that none of the more than 300 guests that night could ever forget. It was my younger sister Sophia's extravagant engagement party, held in a five-star hotel with crystal chandeliers, a string quartet playing softly, and rows of chairs draped in crisp white silk. I sat quietly in the second row, unnoticed, unremarkable, until my father, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, stepped up to the podium, raised his glass of champagne, and proudly declared, "I will have the honor of walking my youngest daughter down the aisle." Like the kind father everyone admires. I couldn't hold it in. A laugh broke out, echoing sharply in the silent ballroom. I stood, looked straight at him, and spoke each word clearly. How ridiculous. The father who abandoned us for years, who never raised us a single day, now wants to play the hero in front of everyone. The room froze. Eyes turned toward me, astonished, doubtful, then shaken. Have you ever had to sit in silence while the person who hurt you most was celebrated like a hero? Share your feelings in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. Because right after this, I'm going to tell you the whole truth behind that so-called perfect family. I was born into a family obsessed with appearances, as if the slightest crack could bring everything down. My father, Richard, was a charming man, skilled at convincing others he was the model dad. My mother, Elaine, always appeared with flawless makeup and a gentle smile, knowing exactly what to say to keep admiration on her side. But behind the doors of our old two-story house in the Portland suburbs, the reality was entirely different. I was the firstborn. When my mother had me, she was just 23 and still in the middle of her master's program in California. They weren't ready to be parents, at least, not to a daughter. My mother once told me, in the same casual tone one might use to talk about the weather, "When I found out I was pregnant, I cried because I thought it would be a boy. But it was fine. Your grandparents were happy to help." Help meant taking me in completely. I was never called our little one, or shown in a family photo on my father's desk. When I was only 6 months old, my parents sent me to live with my maternal grandparents in Salem, nearly a 2-hour drive away. Their excuse was always, "Work is too busy," or "We don't want the baby exposed to stress." But even as a child, I felt the unspoken truth. I had never been the child they wanted. For nearly the first 8 years of my life, I lived with my grandparents Thomas and Margaret, who never once treated me as a burden. Grandpa taught me how to tie my shoes, how to sit still and listen to the rain against the window, how to form my very first letters. Grandma let me follow her into the garden every morning, showing me how to recognize herbs and tiny blossoms. My childhood, if you didn't count the rejection, was full of gentleness and color. Sometimes my mother would call, not to ask how I was doing, but to remind them to dress me properly if visitors came by, or to warn Grandma not to let me eat too much ice cream in case I ruined my figure. On holidays like Thanksgiving or Christmas, my parents sent family photos by email, always taken at the main house, without me. In those pictures, my parents sat proudly in the living room with a blonde, wide-eyed little girl beside them, my sister, Sophia. I can't pinpoint the moment Sophia replaced me in their hearts. Maybe it was when Mom decided to stay home after Sophia was born. Or maybe it was when Sophia started speaking and calling them Mommy and Daddy in that sweet little voice adults melt over. Whatever the moment was, the truth didn't change. She was raised in the home I had only ever longed for. I met Sophia when she was about 2. My parents brought her to the grandparents' house for the holidays. She wore a pale pink velvet dress, her hair braided like a fairy tale doll. I watched her from a distance, too timid to approach. Mom picked her up, smiling brightly, then turned to me with sharpness in her voice. "Maya, wipe your shoes before coming in." Don't let the baby see you looking so dirty. I was 7 then, holding the wooden doll Grandpa had carved for me. I froze, not out of sadness, but because I suddenly understood there are children who are called ours, and there are children who are treated as leftovers. When I was 8, my grandparents were diagnosed with high blood pressure and told to rest more. My parents no longer had an excuse to keep me away. They brought me back to the main house, but I never felt like I belonged. My room was a converted laundry room at the end of the hall, windowless. At my first dinner with them, Mom smiled and asked, "Remember how to sit up straight when we have guests?" I nodded and spent the meal quietly picking at vegetables. Sophia sat at Dad's right, given the best portions, praised in every conversation as the perfect child with a bright future. At a year-end party, my father introduced her to a colleague. "This is my youngest daughter, Sophia, the pride of the family." I was standing right there, holding a tray of pastries from the kitchen. I smiled politely and turned away quickly. In that moment, I realized there was no point trying to earn their recognition. They had made their choice, and I was just the faint memory they preferred to hide behind their story of a model family. When my brother Benjamin was born, my parents called me from the hospital not to share joy, but to order me to watch Sophia and make sure she didn't eat too much candy. I was 13, suddenly the unpaid babysitter in a family that never saw me as one of their own. From then on, roles were cemented. Benjamin was the center, Sophia the golden child, and me the shadow. A shadow who did homework for her sister, cleared the dinner table, stayed quiet when my parents fought about money or appearances. In silence, I grew up. Patient, observant, careful not to break the fragile mask of perfect family. But the feeling of being unwanted never left. It was like standing outside in the winter cold, watching a warm, glowing house where everyone laughed inside doors locked tight against me. When I moved back at 8, everything changed so fast it left me spinning. The house from the photos, white curtains, beige carpets, polished walnut dining table was now the place I was told to call home. But walking into that kitchen felt like stepping into a stranger's house. There was no space for me, no photo of me on the wall, no real welcome. "You're back?" Mom said without looking up, slicing fruit for Sophia, who sat swinging her legs on a high chair. "Take your bag to your room, then help me fold the table linens." My room was in the attic, low ceiling, sweltering in summer, a sagging old mattress once belonging to some distant relative. I didn't complain. I didn't ask why Sophia had a spacious princess room with rose curtains and a swan-shaped night lamp. I stayed quiet because I knew I had no choice. Within 2 weeks, a new routine was enforced. I had to wake at 6 a.m. to help prepare breakfast, clean the kitchen, and only then could I eat. I washed dishes, scrubbed floors, did laundry for everyone. "Think of it as learning independence," Mom said, while Sophia slept in until 8 a.m. and was spoon-fed warm pancakes. On school days, I had to rush home to cook dinner and clean, never allowed to stay for clubs or group projects. If I asked, Mom frowned. "What's the point? Nothing useful comes from that. Better to help at home." But Sophia was different. Whenever she got an A on a math test or was praised at parent-teacher meetings, my parents threw little dinner parties, bought her new dresses, books, or let her pick her favorite meal. I once won a district writing contest. I placed the certificate on the dining table before dinner, waiting for a word of recognition. Mom glanced at it, nodded slightly, and slipped it into a drawer like it was a utility bill. No hug, no smile. And I, as always, cleared the dishes when the meal ended. I eventually understood. No matter what I did, it would never be called an achievement. Cooking, cleaning, straight A's, it was just duty. Dad barely noticed me. His time was spent working or with Sophia. He read her stories, walked her around the yard, while I scrubbed dishes, folded laundry, and prepped breakfast for the next day. Once, I dropped a plate while washing dishes. It slipped from my wet hands, shattering on the floor. Dad rose, stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. You can't do anything right. I remember standing frozen in that kitchen, surrounded by shards, tears pressing at my eyes but unable to fall. When I was 13, Mom announced during dinner that she was pregnant again. She rested a hand on her belly, smiling. This time, I have a strong feeling. It's a boy. Dad lowered his newspaper, removed his glasses, and looked at her intently. Really? Are you sure? When she nodded, I saw a light in his eyes I had never seen directed at me or Sophia. They pinned all hopes on Benjamin, the long-awaited son. The house was redecorated, a nursery painted pale blue with plush toys and Star Moon mobiles. I was moved to the basement so they could prepare space for a nanny. When Benjamin was born, they held a huge party, inviting nearly the entire neighborhood. I stood at the edge of the yard, carrying a tray of drinks, watching people congratulate my parents as if they had won a grand prize. I, who never had even a proper birthday cake, smiled faintly and kept pouring juice. From then on, Benjamin was the universe. Anything he needed, he had. Closets filled with designer clothes, a European baby rocker, a smart crib with adjustable lighting, cameras to monitor him remotely. Every milestone rolling over, crawling, speaking, was filmed, uploaded, captioned with my mother's pride. Sophia, now a teenager, remained pampered. She had ballet lessons, violin, art classes, each with a driver. Mom introduced her to neighbors as our golden daughter. And me, even though I lived in that house, I had become invisible. No one asked what I thought, wanted, or felt. They only needed me to keep the perfect facade polished, and I did. But inside, something else grew, a quiet resolve, a memory bank of every slight, every look, every word. I never spoke it, but I never forgot. And those memories, one day, they would strip away the truth my parents forced upon the world. Though I lived under their roof, the only place I truly felt myself was 100 miles away, in a little flower-filled house in Salem. That was where my grandparents lived. Thomas and Margaret, not relatives, but family. Every holiday or weekend I was allowed to leave. I packed early, clutching my worn canvas bag, waiting for Mom's word. The long drive never tired me. It was my bridge out of silence and duty. Just seeing the wooden porch steps, where Grandpa waited in brown slippers with a steaming cup of tea, felt like breathing again. "Hello, my girl," he would smile, taking my heavy bag and patting my back. "Did you bring something new for us to read?" I usually carried a few old novels from the school library, sometimes only so he'd have an excuse to sit with me all afternoon on the porch. He had been a literature teacher before retiring. When I was small, he taught me the difference between a sharp sentence and a hollow one. He explained rhythm in dialogue, how readers could feel emotions without being shouted at. But the greatest lesson he gave me was dignity. No one can tell you how much you're worth. Grandpa once told me on a summer night, after I had just been scolded by my father for burning the rice pot, "Not even the people who should love you the most. They don't have the right to define who you are." I sat on the porch, listening quietly to the cicadas, then lifted my head and asked, "If that's true, what should I do to make them see me?" He placed his hand on my shoulder, warm and steady like the trunk of an old tree. "It's not about what you do so they'll see you. It's about how you live so you can see yourself. The rest doesn't matter." Grandma Margaret was gentler, but no less profound. She rarely gave long lectures. Instead, she showed me my worth through the little things she did. She never forgot my birthday, always sewing a handkerchief with my name embroidered in green thread. She brewed tea the way I liked, remembered every preference, every fear, though no one had ever taught her to. One evening, while I was folding her laundry, she walked into the room, sat beside me, and looked at me for a long time. You matter, Maya, she said, as though it needed no proof. Even when your parents don't see it, especially when they don't. I didn't dare turn my head, only bit my lip hard. But inside, those words burned like a small lantern, keeping me warm through many years to come. In those early years, Sophia often felt awkward whenever she came with me to our grandparents' house. She would watch me reading with Grandpa or hear me chatting softly with Grandma in the kitchen, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. I sensed a mix of doubt, maybe envy, not because she wasn't loved, but perhaps because she had never seen anyone treat me that way. At home, I was at the very bottom of the ladder. But here, with them, I was allowed to be a child, free to laugh, to make mistakes, to fall. Once Sophia asked me as we sat beneath the apple tree in the backyard, "Do you think Grandpa and Grandma love you more than me?" I looked at her, then lowered my gaze, answering honestly, "Maybe they love me differently than they love you, but they don't love anyone less." She was silent for a while, then nodded and leaned her head on my shoulder. "I just wish I had afternoons reading books like you do." From then on, I began inviting her into everything. Even though she was small, whenever I trimmed plants with Grandma or organized books with Grandpa, I called her over. Even if she only sat nearby, I wanted her to feel it too, that sense of being important, of belonging without having to earn it. The bond between Sophia and me, though sometimes unsteady, never broke. Maybe because we both grew up in a house where love was scarce, we learned to turn toward each other instead of away. There were moments I resented her for being spoiled, for speaking like our mother, for forgetting that I too was part of the family. But whenever I saw her asleep, arms wrapped around a fairy tale book I'd been reading to her, my anger softened. Grandma once watched us cleaning the living room together, then pulled me aside and whispered, "You may not have everything, but you can give what you never received." I carried those words in my heart for years. They stopped me from being jealous, from competing with Sophia, from seeing her as the chosen one. She wasn't the cause of my hunger for affection. She was just a little girl, lost in the same house as me, only treated differently by those around her. It was my grandparents who taught me not to become a distorted reflection of rejection. They showed me I didn't need to be cold or bitter to survive. I could remember and still forgive. I could hurt and still move forward without losing my heart. And because of that, when everything later began to fall apart, I had the strength to stand tall, not to seek revenge, but to choose what real family meant, and what was nothing more than a hollow title masking a truth too ugly to face. I entered 15 in a house that grew more suffocating by the day, not from lack of space, but from the unspoken things everyone felt yet no one admitted. I studied hard, worked hard, tried not to be a burden, but no matter what I did, I remained a shadow at the edge of their lives. That year, my school held a career counseling session for 10th graders. The counselor sat beside me, looked over my grades, and said with encouragement, "Maya, with grades like these, you could absolutely qualify for scholarships to major universities." I smiled, my heart racing, because for once someone had looked at my effort and named it clearly: potential. That night at dinner, I mentioned the counseling session. My mother, carving roast meat, froze mid-slice. She looked up at me as if I had just said something absurd. "You really plan to go to college?" I nodded. "And who do you think will pay your tuition? Do you think we're made of money?" I answered calmly, "I'll try for scholarships. If I need to, I can work while I study." She set the knife down with a sharp clang. "Maya, be realistic. You don't have what it takes for college. Being good at sewing, knowing how to cook, that's more than enough. There are plenty of good trade schools. Learn a skill, get a stable job, marry, have children. That's happiness." My father kept reading the paper, not lifting his head. but Sophia sat there, holding her glass of juice, eyes wide, looking back and forth between Mom and me. I swallowed the lump in my throat and whispered, I don't want the life you've planned out for me. I want to choose. Dad folded the newspaper and slammed it onto the table. Choose what? You think you'll become a professor? Don't waste everyone's time. You're nothing but a burden. The words stung like a slap, but the real slap came right after. He stood, raised his hand, and struck me across the face as I sat frozen in my chair. The room went silent. I didn't cry. I simply stood, my cheek burning hot and cold, then quietly left the table. That night, I stuffed a few clothes into my canvas bag, leaving my books behind. I didn't know where I was going, but my feet carried me to the only place where I knew I wouldn't be hit for daring to dream, my grandparents' house. I knocked when the sky was already dark. Grandpa opened the door, his face sinking when he saw me. What happened, child? I didn't answer. I only bowed my head. He let me in, asked Grandma for a cold cloth, then sat across from me, his eyes calm yet deep. You don't have to speak until you're ready. But if you've been hurt, Maya, the one at fault isn't you. I lifted my head, tears spilling uncontrollably. I told him everything, every detail. The slap, the humiliation, the dreams trampled underfoot. I spoke while clenching my fists, afraid that if I let go, I would shatter. When I finished, he rose and picked up the landline phone. I heard him call someone his old friend, a family lawyer. You'll stay here. You don't need to go back to that house, he said, his voice no longer soft but firm, unyielding. That night he called my father. I sat beside him, listening to every word. Richard, Maya is here with me. And hear me clearly, if you ever touch her again, or let your wife hurt her, I'll take you to court. I'll fight for custody, and I'll see it through. I couldn't hear what came from the other end, but I saw Grandpa's grip tighten on the receiver, his voice steady as stone. You're my son, but if you're unworthy to be her father, then I'll take that place. I had never seen him like that before. The man who planted carrots in the garden, who read the paper every morning, now stood in his own living room, like a warrior guarding the last piece of justice. After the call, he laid his hand on my shoulder. Maya, from now on you have the right to dream whatever you wish. And if anyone dares to stop you, remember I will be the one standing in front of you. Sitting there, in a kitchen scented with cinnamon and fresh-baked cookies, I felt I'd been given something greater than protection. I had been acknowledged. Not for grades, not for achievements, not for family image, but simply for being me. And that was enough. The next day, my mother came to my grandparents' house. She didn't come inside. She stood in the yard, her voice sharp as steel. Do you want the whole neighborhood to think I'm a terrible mother, Maya? I stepped out to the doorway. I don't have to do anything for them to think that, Mom. They only have to look. She left without another word. From that day on, I began a new journey. Not just leaving the house, but leaving the mold they had tried to cast me in. I didn't want to become my mother's failed copy. I wanted to be myself. And I finally had someone who believed I could. That person wasn't my father, not my mother. It was my grandfather, the one who taught me that trust isn't easy to come by, but when placed in the right hands, it can pull a child out of the dark. I left for Boston on a sunny August morning. Grandpa tied my suitcase tightly himself, while Grandma slipped a box of oatmeal cookies into my bag with a ribbon, as if I were only leaving for a few days. But I knew this time was a real turning point. Not running away, stepping forward. I had been accepted into a prestigious university in Boston on a full scholarship for finance students. That scholarship wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a key, unlocking a door I had once thought was never mine to open. On the first day of school, I stood in the courtyard among hundreds of freshmen with brand new backpacks, shiny phones, and rolling suitcases. I didn't bring much. My clothes folded neatly into 2 canvas bags, a notebook, and a handwritten letter from Grandpa reminding me, no matter how far you go, never forget who you are. I rented a small dorm room bunk bed, shared bathroom. At night, I worked part-time in the campus library, shelving books and entering data. On weekends, I worked at a little coffee shop on Tremont Street where I learned to pull espresso shots by hand, scrub floors with stiff brushes, and keep smiling even when customers complained about cold muffins. No one from home called to ask how I was. Not a single text. My mother knew I had gone, but there was no goodbye, no blessing. A few weeks later, Sophia sent me a short email. "Are you okay?" I replied, "Okay. And you?" After that, no more messages. I didn't blame her. She was trapped in the same system she didn't create. I understood, so I never demanded more. 4 years of college passed like a constant uphill climb, but every step was steady. I studied day and night, submitted every paper on time, passed difficult exams, and grabbed every opportunity to save money. I never skipped class, never asked for an extension, because failing was not an option. By my junior year, I was offered an internship at a well-known investment firm in Back Bay. They didn't care where I came from. They cared about how quickly I could analyze financial reports, process data, and collaborate with a team. I worked twice as hard as everyone else, not to prove a point, but because I understood the value of my seat there. At the end of that year, when the internship concluded, the department director, Mr. Chandler, called me into his office. "Kid, I thought you'd quit after the first month," he said half-jokingly, then handed me an envelope. "But not only did you last, you impressed us. This is a job offer for after you graduate. If you want it, the seat's yours." I walked out of that building onto Boylston Street, the wind whipping strong, but I didn't feel cold at all. I graduated the following spring at 22, with honors and a job contract in hand. I rented a small apartment in Jamaica Plain, used my savings to buy my first sofa, and framed my diploma myself, hanging it in the living room. Not to boast, but to remind myself I had made it through. Meanwhile, Sophia had started college too, but stayed close to home, attending a small private school. My parents bought her a car, paid all her tuition, rented her a private apartment near campus, and even sent her frozen organic meals so she wouldn't have to cook. She didn't have to work a day. She only needed to keep her grades steady. I wasn't jealous, but sometimes, late at night, brewing coffee at 2 a.m., while finishing a financial analysis, I wondered if Sophia had been born first, would my life have been different? As for Benjamin, there was no question. By the time he turned 18, he already had his own savings account, his college tuition planned since he was 3. My parents bought him a modern apartment on the west side of the city, furnished with high-end pieces and a supplementary credit card. I heard about it from an old friend who'd run into my mother at a Rotary Club fundraiser. She introduced Benjamin as our pride and joy, boasting about his MBA plans as though he had already won a Harvard scholarship. My friend asked, "And what about Maya? I heard she studied finance too?" My mother only gave a faint smile. "That girl, I don't even know where she lives now. She doesn't keep in touch." When I heard that story, I stayed silent, because that was part of the life I had chosen. A life that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. After a few years of working, I was promoted to senior financial advisor, directly managing the portfolios of many large clients. My life was stable, not glamorous, but I had my own home, a small car, and a savings account that kept me from worrying at the end of each month. And most importantly, I had the freedom to choose my own path. I no longer lived to prove anything to anyone. I lived so I wouldn't lose myself. And to me, that was the quietest yet greatest victory. Grandma passed away on a winter morning, just as I was getting ready to leave for the office. The phone rang at 6:13 a.m., and Grandpa's name appeared on the screen. I answered, surprised, since he rarely called that early. On the other end was his voice, strangled as if someone were gripping his throat, speaking slowly. Maya, your grandma is gone. I didn't reply right away. All I could hear in my head was the wind whistling past the window. The silence around me was so heavy I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, each second stretching endlessly. When I arrived in Salem, a light drizzle was falling. The little flower-filled house now wore a cloak of gray sorrow. Grandpa stood on the porch without an umbrella, his silver hair speckled with rain. I walked in, wrapped my arms around him, and couldn't say a word. The funeral was held 2 days later at a small church at the end of the street. I sat beside him, holding his hand tightly through the service. Relatives and old family friends came forward one by one to express condolences. Everyone said she was a gentle woman, always a good listener, always leaving people with a sense of warmth after each conversation. I sat quietly, but inside my head were hundreds of little memories. Her laughter while brewing ginger tea, the smell of cinnamon cookies baking in the oven, the way she touched my back when I was sad without asking a single question. My parents arrived at the funeral at the last minute, striding in as though they were hosting the ceremony. My mother wore a long black wool coat that brushed her ankles, her face untouched by weariness. My father followed behind, hands in the pockets of his overcoat, eyes scanning the room. When they approached Grandpa and me, my mother simply nodded. No condolences, no hug. My father glanced at me as if trying to recall the name of an old acquaintance. Sophia and Benjamin were there too, but neither looked at me. They stood on the opposite row, just a few steps away, but throughout the service not a single glance was exchanged. As I quietly left the church after the visitation, I caught Sophia lowering her face as I passed. Benjamin turned and walked in the opposite direction. I didn't blame them, but I felt, with painful clarity, a truth I had never spoken aloud. I had been erased from their definition of family long ago. That evening after the funeral, Grandpa and I sat together on the porch. The air was cold, and I poured him tea, his hand trembling slightly. He hadn't cried during the service, but now, with only me beside him, silent tears slid down his wrinkled cheeks. Maya, he said softly, his voice breaking, you're the only one who still remembers we are family. I didn't know how to answer. I only held his hand tighter. From that day on, I rearranged my work so I could return to Salem more often. Every 2 weeks, I drove back to his house, bringing food, vitamins, and sometimes just a simple basket of fruit. I mowed his lawn, repainted the fence, peeling after winter, replaced the curtains in the living room, but the most important thing was that we sat together. Sometimes flipping through old photos Grandma had kept in a wooden box on top of the cupboard. Sometimes reading old poems Grandpa had written for her. Sometimes watching his favorite black and white films from the 1960s. I didn't talk much about my job, he didn't ask. He only said, "I'm proud of you," then smiled quietly, his eyes wet, his gaze drifting as though walking through a lifetime of memories. I realized that no matter how chaotic life outside became, no matter how many achievements or hardships came my way, that little house was always the place my heart sought for. Rest. Not because it was perfect, but because it held someone who understood that I had once been small, once wounded, once desperate to be seen, and who stayed with me despite it all. One afternoon, as I was about to wash the dishes after dinner, Grandpa stood by the window, holding a teacup, looking out at the freshly trimmed garden. He spoke slowly, almost whispering to himself. Your grandma once said, if there's a grandchild strong enough to break free from this family's cycle, it would be you. I stopped, looked at him for a long time, then walked over and hugged him from behind. I didn't break free to run away, I said, my voice trembling. I broke free so I could come back and make it different. He didn't answer, but I felt his breathing slow. as if nodding in silent agreement. From that moment, I understood I wasn't living to escape the past. I was living to make sure the past would never repeat itself. Not with me, not with him, not with any child growing up in a family where love was conditional on obedience. I heard about Sophia's engagement through one of her former colleagues, who happened to follow the same wedding inspiration page online. They sent me a photo, Sophia in an emerald dress, holding a bouquet of white asters, standing beside a man with steady eyes and a gentle smile. Beneath the photo was the caption, "She said yes." I wasn't surprised. Sophia and Ethan had been together since college. Ethan was a good man, raised in a family with strong values and tradition. Every time I heard Sophia mention him, her voice softened, as if a protective layer around her heart was slowly being peeled away. I didn't comment on the post, but I truly smiled, because I understood, despite everything, she deserved a gentler ending than mine. A few weeks later, my phone rang during a meeting. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number. I ignored it. Then came 3 more calls from the same number. Finally, a text. "Maya, it's Mom. Call me back." I read the line over and over. 4 years of silence. 4 years of living as if I had never existed in their lives. And now, one short, bare message, no greeting, no remorse. I didn't call back right away, but I sensed something stirring behind the curtain. 2 days later, I received Sophia's wedding invitation, an elegant white envelope sent by express delivery. Inside was a card with embossed print, metallic trim, the bride and groom's names framed by lavender motifs. In the corner, handwritten in a familiar script, was a note. "I hope you'll come, Maya. And if you can, please arrive a little early." I had never expected it. But those words, her handwriting, moved something inside me. 3 days later, Mom called again. I answered. "Maya, I want to talk." I waited silently, expecting what she would say. And she didn't disappoint. "You've heard, haven't you? Sophia's getting married. It's an important event. The whole family will be there. I think it's time you reunited. Put the past aside. For the family. For tradition." "What tradition?" I asked, my voice steady. "A father walking his daughter down the aisle. Picture it, Maya, Sophia in her wedding dress, in front of hundreds of guests, all eyes on her. How could the image of her father leading her to the altar be missing? It's what everyone expects." "You mean what everyone wants? What about Sophia?" Silence on the other end. I heard a sigh, then her voice, sharp and almost scolding. "Maya, you don't understand. No matter what happened before, a wedding is a big deal. Your father is looking forward to this. Ethan's family is from a respected background. If Sophia's wedding is missing her father, what will people think?" I closed my eyes. They hadn't changed. Still polishing a glossy veneer over a rotting foundation. They didn't care who was hurt, only how it looked to outsiders. "You could come early. On Sunday," she continued, "we'll talk as a family. Then you'll see it's easier than you think." I didn't answer right away, but I agreed to meet, not for her. For Sophia. That Sunday, I arrived at the old house in Portland in the afternoon. The white painted wooden door was still the same, but the front yard looked more barren. Dad opened the door. He looked at me for a few seconds, then stepped aside. "Maya," he nodded, "long time no see." I walked into the living room, where Mom sat upright, a steaming cup of tea in her hand. Dad sat opposite, the middle seat left empty. I chose a corner by the window. "We don't have much time," Mom began, "so I'll be direct. Your father has prepared his speech for the ceremony. He'll also walk Sophia down the aisle. I trust you won't object." I looked at Dad. He said nothing, only adjusted his collar, as if he were standing before a mirror instead of facing the daughter he once struck. "Are you sure Sophia agrees?" I asked. She's gentle. She won't do anything to embarrass the family. I nodded slowly. And what if Sophia chooses someone else to walk her down the aisle? Mom froze. Dad narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? I stood, my voice calm yet firm. If Sophia decides the one to walk her is the person who held her up when she collapsed, who listened when her parents turned away, would you still call that betraying tradition? No one answered. I walked out the door without another word, because I knew, from the sound of my voice, they had already begun to understand. This wedding wasn't their stage to reclaim pride. It was Sophia's moment to choose what felt true to her heart, and if she chose Grandpa, the only one who had always made her feel loved that wasn't rebellion, it was justice. And it would be the first time they'd have to stand on the sidelines watching a daughter step toward happiness without needing them as props. That night, I returned to Grandpa's house, the sharp edges of my mother's words still pricking inside me. Words like needles, no blood drawn, but leaving a dull ache behind. Grandpa sat on the porch, a soft blanket over his legs, holding the book I had given him months earlier. The warm yellow light from inside the house made his face look even gentler, his faded eyes still carrying their familiar calm. I placed my hand on his shoulder. I'm back, Grandpa. He turned, his gaze softening when he saw me. Tired, child. I shook my head and sat on the step beside him. I went to see them, I said, my voice as low as the night breeze. They want Dad to walk Sophia down the aisle. They say it's for tradition, for appearances. He didn't reply, only sighed lightly. His silence has always made me feel understood without long explanations. Sophia hasn't told them anything yet, I added. I think she's still waiting. He looked out toward the front yard, where Grandma's lavender once bloomed. Now only dry stalks remained. She has her own will. She's never been allowed to speak it. I nodded. We sat in that easy silence a while longer before I went inside. But before I could head upstairs, my phone buzzed. It was Sophia. Her voice came through softly, but not weak. Are you with Grandpa? Yes. How are you? She didn't answer right away. I heard a faint sigh. Mom and Dad called me over today, she said, steadying her tone. They laid out the entire wedding plan as if it were theirs. Every detail, every step, who stands where, who holds the microphone, who gives speeches, none of it was mine to decide. And the person walking you down the aisle? They assumed it would be Dad, Sophia replied, then hesitated. But no, I don't want that. I sat on the edge of the bed, my heartbeat slowing as I absorbed every word she said. I want Grandpa to walk me down the aisle. Sophia spoke more. Clearly now, more firmly. No one else. I didn't answer. I only pressed my lips together. It felt as though a knot inside me had finally loosened, leaving me light enough to ache with relief. I don't need someone to hold my hand just for a pretty photo, she continued, her voice trembling. I need the person who wiped my tears, who held me when I woke up, panicked in the middle of the night after Mom's scolding, who listened to me read those ridiculous poems I wrote as a teenager. The only person who never made me feel small or meaningless. I steadied myself and asked softly, "Are you sure this is what you want?" "Absolutely. I've never been more certain of anything in my life." We agreed to meet the next afternoon at a small cafe near the public library. Sophia arrived first, her hair tied neatly, her face lightly made up but unable to hide the exhaustion beneath. When she saw me, she stood and hugged me for a long time. "I'm sorry for not calling you sooner." I stepped back, holding her hands. "It's okay. You called. That's enough." We sat in a quiet corner. She spread out a small notebook already filled with sketches of the wedding plan. I was surprised by how much she had prepared. "I won't say anything to Mom and Dad until the wedding day," she said, eyes fixed on the page. "I'll let them believe what they want. I don't want a scene." But at that moment, when the music starts and I step out, Grandpa will be the one beside me. I studied her. Sophia had changed. She was no longer the little sister who hung her head under mom's criticism, no longer the girl who hid behind me whenever she was forced to choose. Now she sat before me, steady, clear-minded, calm in a way that stunned me. "I'll take care of informing the event coordinators," I told her. "I'll make sure nothing interrupts your plan." "Thank you," she whispered, placing her hand over mine. "Without you, I think I'd have the courage to do this." I didn't respond, but inside me spread a quiet warmth. We had grown up under the same roof, shared the same hunger for love, yet somehow found our way back to each other. Through every storm, we still chose to remain side by side, and we weren't hiding. Together, we would redefine what family meant not by appearances, but by real love. When I told Grandpa everything, he didn't react right away. He quietly poured tea, set the cup in front of me, then said, "I thought my days of doing something meaningful were over." I took his hand. "You've always been meaningful to us." He squeezed gently, his eyes brimming. "That girl, Sophia, don't you see? She has your grandma's eyes whenever she makes up her mind." I nodded. "And I've got your voice." I smiled. Calm, but enough to make people listen. We sat longer than usual that evening. No one mentioned my parents. No one brought up anger or resentment. We only talked about wedding flowers, tablecloth colors, and the song Sophia would choose for that moment, the moment an old man, who had lived a life of love and patience, would walk slowly beside his granddaughter, leading her through the gaze of everyone toward the man she had chosen for life. And no one could stop it. Not because we were stronger, but because we were no longer afraid. Sophia's engagement party was held at a luxurious hotel overlooking Mirror Lake, the same place she and Ethan had often visited during their college years. The space glowed with candlelight, tables draped in cream silk, white flowers mixed with lavender arranged in graceful spirals. Every detail bore Sophia's careful touch, each note of music filling the hall with quiet elegance. I arrived early, just as she asked, in a simple dark green dress. Grandpa came with me, dressed in his old suit that I had secretly altered a few days earlier, now fitting him perfectly, as if it were tailored just for this night. He walked slowly but firmly. Each step beside me steadied my own turbulent emotions. Guests began arriving in greater numbers. I saw relatives who had once turned their backs when I left home at 15 now entering the hall with glasses of wine, smiling as though nothing had ever happened. For a moment, the air pressed down on me, but I wasn't here to hide. Not anymore. I went backstage, where Sophia was adjusting the folds of her rehearsal gown. She turned at the sight of me, her lips curving into a quiet smile. I nodded. No words were needed. We both knew what truly mattered was still ahead. When everyone was seated, the MC took the stage to introduce the families, then invited my parents to give their remarks. My father held the microphone, stepping into the spotlight as if he were running a shareholder meeting instead of his daughter's engagement party. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice deep, polished like a seasoned politician. "We, the bride's family, are incredibly proud of Sophia, a devoted daughter, a gentle young woman, and now ready to begin a new chapter with the man she trusts." I kept my eyes fixed on him. "As her father," he continued, "I feel honored to give my daughter into the hands of a worthy man. This is not just a ceremony, but a tradition, a symbol of love and responsibility." I rose to my feet. Every gaze turned to me. The room seemed to hold its breath as my footsteps echoed against the wooden floor. I stepped onto the stage, stopping beside him. He stared, startled, still clutching the microphone. I extended my hand. "May I borrow this for a moment?" My father hesitated. Before he could respond, my mother shot up from the guest table. "Maya, what are you doing?" Facing the crowd, the spotlight on my face, my voice did not waver. "Forgive the interruption, but I think it's time some things were said out loud. I scanned the room, familiar faces, unfamiliar ones, some wide-eyed, some avoiding my gaze. I'm Maya, the bride's sister. Many of you may not know me, or only know fragment stories of the difficult child. The daughter who ran away to college without a word, the one who missed birthdays, who never called home for holidays. My voice dropped lower, still holding the microphone steady. But what no one has ever told you is this. I grew up in a house where love was rationed like food stamps, handed out by rank and obedience. Where excelling in school meant I was accused of showing off, where asking to attend college earned me laughter. I was slapped, called a burden, sent away from the table for failing to fit the mold of the perfect daughter. Murmurs rippled among the guests. I saw eyes shifting toward my parents. And when I left, I didn't just leave a house. I left a system that refused to see me as a person. My father stepped forward, about to snatch the microphone back, but Sophia emerged from behind the curtain. "Stop, Dad," she said, her voice steady. "Let me speak." The hall fell into silence. Everything Maya said, it's all true. She didn't make it up. She didn't exaggerate. And if anyone here feels offended by the truth, that is not her fault. I looked at Sophia, surprised by the strength in her eyes. I've never forgotten who stood by me when Mom called me an emotional burden. I've never forgotten who held me when I woke up panicked in the middle of the night, while no one else cared. And that person wasn't you, Dad. It wasn't you either, Mom. Sophia turned to Grandpa, who stood frozen by the table. Grandpa Thomas, the only one who always listened, always believed, always opened his arms without needing a reason. You will be the one to walk me down the aisle. No one else. Murmurs rose through the room, and a few people clapped. My parents stood stiff, my mother's face turning red while my father looked away, jaw clenched. "You're destroying this family's honor," my mother shouted. Sophia didn't flinch. "I'm only speaking the truth. If the truth makes this family feel ashamed, then that honor was never mine to begin with." I stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder, and in that moment, I no longer saw her as the little sister who needed protecting. She was standing tall on her own, choosing a wedding that wasn't someone else's stage play. My parents walked out of the hall. No one followed. No one stopped them. I stood in the spotlight, beside Sophia and Grandpa, in the heavy silence of something that hadn't existed in years. Truth had finally taken its place, and no one could deny it. Sophia's wedding day dawned clear, sunlight scattering like silk across the branches in the garden where the ceremony was held. White ribbons fluttered in the breeze, and the scent of jasmine and lavender drifted from the tables. Guests arrived early, the atmosphere both intimate and dignified, not showy, but polished in every detail, the result of months of care from Sophia and Ethan. I arrived with Grandpa. He wore the suit I had chosen for him days earlier, with the gray-blue shirt he had once worn to his wedding anniversary with Grandma. His silver hair was neatly combed, his eyes clouded with age but glowing with a light I had never seen before. We didn't talk much on the way. He simply squeezed my hand gently in the car, letting me know he was ready, and that he was walking that aisle out of love, not because anyone allowed or forbade him. When we arrived, every eye turned to him, not with pity, with reverent surprise. Many had heard what happened at the engagement party, and today, they came not just to witness a wedding, but to see something rare in an old-fashioned American family. An elder once considered secondary, now stepping into the center, not because of title, but because of the kindness he had quietly planted all his life. Sophia appeared in her flowing white gown, the fabric catching the wind like a wisp of cloud. Her hair was swept up, a few soft curls falling to her cheeks, and she looked as though she had stepped out of a painting brushed with tenderness. Ethan waited at the end of the aisle, eyes fixed only on her. And in the middle of it all, Grandpa Thomas stood beside her, gently placing his hand over hers. The hall fell silent, then the piano began. It wasn't the traditional wedding march, but a wordless melody she had once listened to with Grandpa on quiet afternoons years ago. Step by step, they walked together down the aisle. The air seemed to slow. Guests rose one by one, clapping not polite applause, but deep, respectful, heartfelt clapping, as though silently acknowledging that in this moment love had won. I stood at the edge, tears falling without me realizing, not from sadness, but because I saw Sophia fully herself at the most important moment of her life. She wasn't letting our parents, or the world, or tradition dictate her path. She was walking as who she truly was. And the man walking her down wasn't someone who wanted her to perform, he was someone who had always seen her as whole. Our parents never came. My mother sent one text early that morning, "We will not be there to witness betrayal." I didn't reply. I didn't feel sorrow either. Deep down, I knew they no longer had the power to ruin what we were building. Benjamin was there. He stood on the outskirts, not in formal wear, but in a gray shirt and jeans. I saw him from a distance, watching Sophia walk, silent, eyes torn. There was conflict in his gaze, but he didn't move forward. He didn't choose a side. The ceremony unfolded with laughter and tears. Sophia and Ethan's vows were so sincere they didn't need grand words. After giving her away, Grandpa stepped back, eyes brimming but filled with peace. Later, when the guests had gone and I was gathering gift boxes, Grandpa's lawyer, Mr. Willis, approached me. "Miss Maya, I have something for you," he said, handing me a thick, sealed envelope. "Mr. Thomas asked me to give this to you after the wedding." Inside was a newly updated will, signed less than a month earlier. His estate, the Salem house, his savings, and remaining shares in a family company that once belonged to Grandma was divided equally between Sophia and me. At the bottom was a handwritten note, his shaky but clear signature beneath it. "I once set these aside for my daughter Elaine, but the ones who truly kept my memories alive, who carried family in every breath, are my two granddaughters. If life is a lamp, then you are the oil. And I believe I am leaving it in the right hands." I clutched the paper, my chest tightening not because of the inheritance, but because he had seen me. He had never looked away from what I tried so hard to hide behind strength. That afternoon, after the last guests left and everything was cleaned up, Sophia, Grandpa, and I returned to the Salem house. We sat on the old wooden porch, each with a cup of tea. "I thought this day would never come," I said, gazing at the lavender field behind the house. "Some days don't come on their own," Grandpa replied. "Someone has to lead them back." Sophia leaned her head on my shoulder, her voice warmer than ever. "You're the one who led me back." I looked at Grandpa. He nodded softly, his eyes glistening as he smiled. We no longer needed blood ties to bind us. Love was enough. And on that sunlit afternoon, for the first time in years, I felt peace. No more resistance, no more running. Just three people sitting together, watching the light fade, believing that from now on, we would never walk in the darkness of abandonment again. I don't know if you've ever felt like the extra peace in the very house you grew up in. The feeling that no matter how hard you try studying well, being good, enduring, you're still never enough. That it takes years, countless tears, and sleepless nights asking whether you deserve love. To finally realize your worth never rested in anyone else's eyes. It lived in what you chose to hold on to and what you found the courage to let go of. My story isn't just about a wedding. It's about a long journey of three people who once thought they had nothing left to keep them together. Yet through trust and through love, both quiet and steady, we found each other again, not to patch up the past, but to write a new future together. And what about you? If you've ever felt abandoned, if you've stood between forgiveness and letting go, what would you choose? Share your story in the comments. I truly want to listen. Because maybe somewhere in what you write, someone else will find themselves. And if this story touched something in your heart, make sure to follow the channel so you won't miss the next stories about family, about old wounds, and about how we learn to heal. Because I believe each of us deserves a place to return to, a place we call home, not perfect, but truly ours.